The order came down on a Tuesday. 48 hours, the paperwork said. Saber had 48 hours left. Celia Dorn read the notice pinned to the break room bulletin board the same way she read everything at Fort Cascabel, quickly, between tasks, with a cup of coffee that had gone cold before she poured it. She almost moved on. She almost didn't stop. But she stopped. The notice described a Belgian Malinois, 7 years old, handler deceased, behavior classified as irreversible aggressive. It listed 3 incidents in 3 weeks. 2 handlers bitten, 1 kennel wall destroyed. It said the dog had stopped eating. It said the euthanasia appointment was scheduled for Thursday at 0800. Celia tore the notice off the board. Then she stood there for a moment, not entirely sure why. She was a clinic nurse. She worked triage, post-op recovery, the occasional overnight shift when the base medics needed coverage. She had no business in the K9 facility. She had no authority over anything written on that paper. And yet she folded it into her scrub pocket and carried it with her the rest of the day, like something she hadn't figured out how to put down. Celia had grown up outside of Flagstaff, on 15 acres her uncle Radek leased until the property taxes ate him out of it. Radek Dorn had come from Czechoslovakia at 23 with a vocabulary of 400 English words and an instinct for working dogs that bordered on uncanny. He bred Malinois. He trained them in Czech. Always Czech, even after his English became perfect, because that was how he had learned, and he believed the language lived in the commands the way tone lived in music. You couldn't separate them and keep the meaning intact. Celia had spent summers learning to say "set it" and "Zustung," and came near the way other kids learned to throw a baseball. She never thought it would matter. It was just something her uncle did, something she absorbed the way children absorb everything, without understanding that it was going in. Corporal Dmitry Koslov had been dead for 22 days when Celia Dorn took a wrong turn. She had been heading to the records annex on the far side of the administrative block. The route was supposed to take her past the motor pool and the covered walkway by the supply depot. But a construction detour had shifted the temporary fencing overnight, and she ended up threading through a corridor she had never walked before. Low ceilings, fluorescent lights humming at a frequency that sat just below the threshold of conscious annoyance, the smell of industrial cleaner underneath something older and animal. The K9 holding block was behind a reinforced door at the end of the hall. She knew that only because the sound coming through it was unmistakable. It was not barking. Barking is a dog asking for something. What came through that door was different. A sound that lived at the intersections of grief and fury, repetitive and total, like something that had been going on long enough to become the dog's whole world. Celia stood in that hallway for about 10 seconds, then she pushed the door open. There were 2 kennel techs inside. One of them had a catch pole. The other was standing well back, arms crossed, watching a large Malinois hurl itself against the chain-link wall of the 3rd run, with a rhythm that had worn a patch of raw skin behind his left ear. The dog was the color of sand and shadow. His eyes were wild in a way that was not random. They tracked, they focused, they landed on Celia the moment she came through the door. He stopped moving. The room went quiet enough that she could hear the fluorescent lights again. "Ma'am, you can't be in here," the tech with the catchpole said. He was young, maybe 22, and he sounded more confused than authoritative. Celia's was not looking at him. She was looking at Saber. Saber was looking at her. There was about 20 feet of air between them and a chain-link door, and something in that 20 feet had gone very still. Without planning to, without deciding to, she said it, low and even, the way Radek had always said it. Klid. The Czech word for calm. Saber sat down. Not gradually, not uncertainly. He sat down the way a trained dog sits when it hears the word it has been waiting to hear, immediately, squarely, with his head up and his ears forward and his eyes still on her face. The tech with the catchpole took a step backward. Celia exhaled. Her hands were steadier than her heartbeat. "How long has he been like this?" she asked. Neither tech answered right away. The one in the back finally said, "Since Kaslov." She already knew the rest of the story by the time she sat down in the kennel supervisor's office 20 minutes later. Corporal Dmitry Kaslov. Saber's handler for 4 years, the only handler Saber had ever had. had died on a Tuesday night 3 weeks ago. The incident report called it a training accident. A rifle cleaning gone wrong in the armory. One shot, negligent discharge, Kaslov alone on the floor by the time anyone came to check. Saber had been in the adjacent room. He had been the first one in the building to know. The dog didn't cause this, Celia said. The kennel supervisor, a compact man named Sergeant Broder, looked at her across his desk with the careful neutrality of someone who had already made a decision he didn't want to discuss. With respect, ma'am, you're the clinic nurse. I know what I am. She kept her voice even. I'm telling you what I'm seeing. That dog is not aggressive. He's in mourning and he's in fear, and those are two different problems than aggression, and they have two different solutions. Broder said nothing for a moment. Then the order is already signed. Then unsigned it, Celia said. Give me 72 hours. She did not fully understand in that moment why she needed it so badly. She had not known Kaslov. She had never met Saber before today. She was a triage nurse on a base where the K9 unit operated in its own separate world, and nothing in her job description connected her to any of this. But she had watched Saber sit on command for the first time in 3 weeks, and something in the quality of his stillness told her that the animal in that run was not broken. He was waiting. He just didn't know yet what he was waiting for. Broder gave her 48 hours. She started from the beginning, not from the aggressive episodes, not from the incident reports, from the beginning of what Saber knew. She had read enough about working dogs to understand that a Malinois trained from puppyhood forms a primary attachment that functions less like a bond and more like a coordinate system. The handler is north. Everything else is measured from that point. When north disappears, the dog does not simply grieve, the entire map goes dark. Saber was not eating because eating required a future, and the dog had no future he could recognize. She brought him high-value food and sat outside the run and talked to him in a low, steady voice the way her uncle had taught her, not at him but near him, letting the sound exist in the air between them without demanding anything. Czech and English, mixed together, the way memory works when you're not performing it. She told him about the drive to Fort Cascabel from Flagstaff, about the stretch of highway where the desert turns purple at dusk, about her uncle's hands on a dog's scruff, firm and sure and never unkind. By the second session, Saber was lying near the run door. By the third, he took food from her hand through the chain link. She was documenting everything: response times, body language, appetite, trigger stimuli. On the second day, she was walking him on a long lead in the outer exercise yard when it happened. A figure cut across the far end of the yard. Staff Sergeant Alexa from logistics, she knew him by sight, had once treated a laceration on his forearm from a supply crate edge. He was moving quickly, head down, not looking at them. Saber locked onto him from 40 yards away. Not the frantic, wall-banging energy from the kennel. Something different, something focused and cold and specific, the way a trained detection dog signals on a target, still, intent, every muscle aligned toward a single point. Celia held the lead and watched. Alexa walked faster. He turned a corner and disappeared. Saber tracked the space where he had been for another 30 seconds before gradually releasing his attention. She wrote it down. She wrote it down again the next morning when Alexa passed the kennel block on his way to the motor pool, and Saber, 80 feet away and behind two walls, began a low, sustained vocalization that the kennel tech said he had never heard from the dog before. Not aggression, not grief. Something with more precision than either. She began asking questions she did not announce as questions. Informal conversations with the armory staff, with Kaslov's bunkmates, with the woman who ran the commissary and knew everyone's patterns because she saw them every day. She asked about Kaslov. She asked about that Tuesday night. She asked about who was where. The armory log showed that Alexa had signed in at 20:43, 13 minutes before Kaslov. The incident report said Kaslov was alone in the building. The sign-out log had only one name on it. It took her 2 more days to find the person who could tell her what those logs actually meant, a retired MP who now worked base security and had been bothered by something in the initial investigation that he had never been able to name. He named it for her over coffee in the commissary, slowly, watching her face to see if she was following. She was following. She went to the Criminal Investigation Division office on a Thursday morning and asked to speak to whoever was handling the Kasloff case. She brought her notes on Saber, the behavioral documentation, the specific dates, the specific times, the specific direction of the dog's attention. She said, "I'm not a detective. I'm a nurse. But I know what a trained dog tracks, and I know what it means when a dog like this points." The agent, a lean woman named Reeves, who had been working the case as a closed accident review and didn't like having her assumptions questioned, looked at the notes for a long time. Then she picked up the phone. The investigation took 11 days. Celia was not part of it. She returned to her clinic shifts, her triage rotations, her cold coffee. She continued to work with Saber every morning and evening, building commands back in one at a time, walking him in the exercise yard, sitting with him in the quiet parts of late afternoon when the bass went soft and the light came in low from the west. He began to eat consistently on day 4. He slept through the night on day 9. On day 11, Agent Reeves came to find her in the clinic. She did not say much. She said that the armory logs had been altered. She said that forensic analysis had found evidence inconsistent with the original report. She said that Staff Sergeant Olexa had been taken into custody that morning and that the Kasloff case had been reclassified. Then she looked at Celia for a moment and said, "That dog of yours, he knew." "He knew," Celia said. She didn't try to explain it further. Some things don't need explanation. Some things just need someone who's paying attention. The Army retired Saber with honors 6 weeks later. There was no ceremony, exactly. The military is not sentimental about paperwork, but the retirement order used words like distinguished service and exceptional record, and the kennel supervisor, Sergeant Broder, shook Celia's hand outside the holding block with a grip that said more than he was going to put into words. Celia had already started the adoption process. It was not straightforward. Nothing involving military working dogs ever is, but she had learned by now that the path through bureaucracy is patience and documentation and knowing which form to file in which order. She had filed 4 forms. She had submitted 2 character references. She had waited. The approval came on a Wednesday. She drove to the kennel block in the early morning, before her shift, when the base was still cool and the sky was the pale color it turns just before the sun clears the ridge. Saber was waiting at the run door when she came in. His tail moved, not exuberant, not performative, just a steady back and forth, the kind of motion that means I knew you were coming. She clipped the lead to his collar. They walked out through the side exit and into the open air. The desert stretched east toward the mountains, the scrub flat and still in the early light, the ground smelling of dust and something green underneath it, the way desert always does if you get close enough. Saber stopped walking for a moment. He lifted his head and looked at the sky. His ears went up and then relaxed, and then he turned to look at her with an expression that Radek Dorn would have recognized immediately, the look of a working dog recalibrating, taking a new bearing, finding north again. She said, "Came nie." "Come with me." He walked beside her, not behind, not ahead, beside, at her knee, matching her stride exactly the way a well-trained dog moves when it has found the person it belongs with. They walked to the edge of the exercise yard, and then to the far perimeter road, and then out into the long scrub that ran toward the mountains, following no path in particular, which was fine because they had nowhere specific to be. 6 months later, Celia Dorn submitted a proposal to the base veterinary office and the Army Human Resources Command simultaneously. She had spent those months writing it in the evenings, after her clinic shifts, with Saber asleep under the desk, and her Uncle Radek's voice in her memory, giving her the vocabulary for things that didn't have official names yet. The proposal outlined a protocol for behavioral assessment in military working dogs facing euthanasia, a last resort evaluation system that would require no specialized training to initiate and no special facilities to run. It required only a nurse or a vet tech or any medical personnel willing to sit outside a run and pay attention. It required only someone willing to ask what a dog was carrying before deciding the dog could no longer carry it. The Army approved it 14 months later. It went into effect at 6 installations before the end of the year. Saber never worked another day as a military dog. He spent his mornings in the exercise yard and his evenings under the desk and his weekends on the long scrub road toward the mountains, moving at Celia's knee, his ears up, his eyes easy, carrying nothing heavier than the morning air. He was the first dog the protocol saved. He was not the last.